Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Souza. I'm one of the senior investment managers here at Sharewise. And we're here with Managing Director Greg Miles from Caspin Resources this morning. Now, Greg's been kind enough to dedicate his time and expertise to both the presentation and the Q&A this morning. So participants, as always, if you would like to submit questions for me to ask Greg after the presentation he's going to give us, please do so using the Q&A function on Zoom, and I'll be sure to ask those away after I run through my opening questions. So, Greg, thank you very much for your time this morning, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to Sharewise for giving me the opportunity. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Caspin presentation. I'm pleased to be able to run you through an update on where Caspin's at with its exploration activities. Sorry, I'll just usual disclaimers. Okay, so Caspin is a ASX listed junior explorer, where essentially our skill set, if you like, is in grassroots or early stage exploration, particularly focusing on base and precious metals. So gold, silver, nickel, copper, and PGEs are our kind of current focus and are the focus for on both our projects. And we're out there in the frontiers unashamedly, although the frontiers, as you'll see, particularly our Yarawindah Brook Project, aren't necessarily as remote as what you might expect, but remote exploration tends to go with the territory. So that's sort of our key operational expertise. We've got a few things going on at the moment. We've got two projects which we'll go through, but primarily at the moment we're focusing on our Mount Squires project. So just a bit of corporate background, fairly small consolidated board, reasonably tight share registry. Myself, I'm a geologist. Justin Tremaine is a well-known sort of corporate executive in Western Australia. Is also the managing director of Taraco Gold. John Horonsky is our other non-executive director. Sits on the board of Paladin Energy, Encounter Resources, and Strickland Metals. So a very busy man, but also a well-credentialed geologist who consults to companies around the world. So we're really lucky to have a guy of his capability on our board. And Stephen Wood rounds out the company secretary activities. A couple of interesting names there on the registry. Talis have been with us from the start. They're a great shareholder and a great partner who we learn a lot of information, share a lot of information with on the technical aspects of the West Yilgarn. Of course, as you see, they're just down the road from us at Yarawindah Brook, going through the study phases of the Gonaville project. And we've got a couple of other sort of high net worth sort of shareholders sort of round out the top 20 with a distinct sort of Asian flavour. So the two projects that I mentioned, our Mount Squires project out in the West Musgrave region of Western Australia, not as remote as you would think. It's actually kind of well developed compared to some of the other parts of Western Australia. We're there mostly for nickel and copper, but we've had some interesting discoveries of rare earths along the way, which we'll also touch on. And then our other main project is Yarawindah Brook, just on the doorstep of Perth. It's only an hour's drive out of the heart of the city into our project area. So really quite unique, I guess, to have an exploration project, and a really interesting part of the world that hasn't had a lot of exploration in recent times until basically Chalice's Gonaville discovery. And that's due primarily to competing land use, as we'll see. So let's talk about Mount Squires project first. And the reason we're sort of focusing on this at the moment is really just more seasonal than anything else. Working out in the desert regions of West Australia, it's better to work out there in the winter months, which also tend to be the dry months as well. Now, this region is prospective for just about every commodity under the sun. Obviously, well known because of the Nebo Bale development, which is just a stone's throw from our tenement boundary. One of the largest undeveloped nickel copper deposits in Australia and probably the world. That's currently owned by BHP through their subsidiary Nickel West, which has obviously been in the news in recent times. Nickel's, obviously under a lot of pressure, and BHP have just publicly announced that they're putting the development on hold for the time being, whilst nickel prices recover. That doesn't affect our exploration strategy whatsoever. We're still sort of focused on the discovery phase, and that's where the real value for our shareholders is. We're not going through that same sort of development stage of developing a resource. You'd obviously feel a lot more pressure with the nickel price if that was the case. Whereas a discovery, I think, is where the real money is made, and that's kind of our focus. Not just on nickel. This land is prospective as much for copper as it is for nickel as well. But there's also some other interesting things going on there. There's sort of some interesting early stage gold prospects, and we've also made an interesting rare earth element discovery as well. So firstly, as I said, look, we're sort of focused on making another large scale nickel copper discovery like Nebo Bale. These are sort of tier 1 type deposits that tend to operate over multi decades and can be enormous wealth generators. We've done a lot of early stage exploration, geophysics, geochemistry, a lot of prospecting on the ground. Our geologists have actually found copper mineralisation at the surface, which is quite rare in this part of the world. As you would have seen, there's it's a lot of sand cover, so the bedrock itself doesn't normally reveal itself. So this ground, we've only really been exploring this for the last sort of 2 years in any kind of intensity. So we're pretty happy with the progress being made. These sort of discoveries or deposits aren't necessarily easy to find, and often require multiple phases of exploration. But we've seen quite a bit of encouragement so far, and I guess what we're focusing on is that extension of that magmatic sulphide trend from Nebo Bale which sits to the northeast of our project area and extends over 12 to 15 kilometres through our project area. And so just zooming in on that area, there's known copper mineralisation just over our tenement boundary at the One Tree Hill prospect that's owned by BHP. Although interestingly, in Caspin's predecessor, Caspin Resources, we actually found that prospect back in, I think, 2016. So really interesting sort of copper mineralisation. Admittedly, it's quite deep, but we think that we might have the up-dip extensions of that mineralisation over our project area, and that's essentially where our Redwood prospect is centred on. We've done some reconnaissance drilling over that, found some copper anomalism at surface, and that really requires some deeper drilling. In the meantime, though, and this is kind of a composite gravity image on the right-hand side, you can see that it's not very sharp, and that's because the data centres are quite sparse. Now, gravity is a really useful exploration tool for finding buried mafic intrusions. These rocks are really quite dense, or denser than the surrounding metamorphosed granite rocks that surround it. So they tend to stand out as kind of blips, pimples, if you like. And we can see the hints of those sort of highs, gravity highs, in the existing data, which is, as I say, quite sparse, but it is hinting that there is some mafic intrusions in that project, in our tenement area, but aren't really well defined with the current data set. So our plan is to, for this season, is to infill that gravity data. So actually get guys out on the ground with a measuring tool at reasonably close sort of spacing and kind of improve the resolution of that data set. And that hopefully will identify some discrete highs, and that provides another, that provides a drilling target for either reconnaissance style drilling, so new air core or RAB drilling, which is sort of shallow drilling across the surface, or some deeper targeted drilling. Now, we know that these sort of rocks exist because we have done some drill programs at the Sienna and Auburn prospects, which are a little bit sort of more in the centre of the project area. We have seen the right rocks. We've seen hints of anomalism, so we know we're in the right area. So that gives us some encouragement. It's really about focusing on what the next sort of the sweet spot of this area might be. And to that end, the Sharon prospect might be one of those sort of targets. It's quite a distinct, well, at the current stage, it's quite a distinct sort of gravity anomaly. The cover here is too thick for our geochemistry to work. So the soil geochemistry only works through relatively thin layers of sand cover. Anything more than, say, 10, 15 meters, and it tends to become ineffective, and you need to use other techniques. EM may or may not work, depending on the style of mineralization. So gravity really is the tool. And so that's what we're going to do, particularly over that corridor from the tenement boundary, stretching past Sharon, Auburn, and through Sienna. And to boot, we've got a bit of government funding to help with that process. So thanks to the WA government's EIS scheme, so Exploration Incentive Scheme, they will co-fund half the cost of that program. So it's relatively low risk for Caspin in terms of monetary outlay and in terms of reward. Meanwhile, as I mentioned before, we have made an interesting rare earth discovery last year. Now, rare earths are a challenging kind of commodity, and we're really pleased with. We were stoked actually to make this discovery in the first place. And I guess what's really important about this is that it had a high proportion of heavy rare earths. So most people are probably familiar with neodymium and praseodymium, sometimes just referred to as NdPr. They're the sort of common light rare earth elements, but the more valuable heavy rare earths are dysprosium and terbium, and a lot harder to find. In fact, there's very little heavy rare earth mined here in Australia at all. So that's the sort of the key differentiator, I guess, for this project. It's a different style to some of the other deposits in Australia, and in fact, it's relatively unique sort of globally. Now, I guess the challenge with rare earths is that the processing can be challenging, and can be the capital required to develop the processing can be quite expensive. So we deliberately have gone down a pathway of partnering with somebody who knows what they're doing on this front. And so we're very happy to partner with Australian Strategic Materials. We've signed an option agreement for them to earn in on the rare earth rights over the project. And I guess the benefit for Caspin shareholders is that ASM bring a huge amount of intellectual property expertise on the rare earth front. They're currently developing the Dubbo project in New South Wales. That's been a long time in the making. If you have a look at their flow sheet, it's quite impressive. So these guys really know what they're doing when it comes to rare earths. So I think on the rare earth front, it's one of those commodities where you've got to kind of put the cart before the horse to some extent, and know that you can actually extract the metal from the ground before you go and do more exploration. And so I guess the key part of our option agreement with ASM is for them to undertake preliminary metallurgy to see that it does present an economically viable scenario. And then if that is the case, then we can undertake a more extensive exploration program, drill program, to really define a large rare earth resort starting at the Duchess prospect. that's just the starting point. There's actually many other rare earth occurrences throughout our project area, as you can see, sort of over a strike of 21 kilometres, through just rock chip sampling and reconnaissance drilling. So we think there's a huge opportunity for rare earth development at the project area and probably in the West Musgrave province itself. So really interesting, albeit still at early days, but we're really pleased that ASM have been able to help us take that opportunity forward. And so let's just lightly touch on Yarawindah Brook Project. Look, our projects tend to be seasonal. I guess it's great to have a project so close to all the infrastructure near Perth, etc. But we are operating in the wheat belt, and it is, as you know, it's winter, and we do have to work around the rainy season. So it's not the ideal time of year to be sort of working out here. What we are doing at the moment on Yarawindah is really focusing on gaining further land access approvals and preparing for the sort of summer season. We have developed some interesting targets, which we'll talk about. That's primarily at the Brassica prospect, which is an extension of the same belt of rocks that extends from Chalice's Gonneville deposit all the way up into our project area, about 40 kilometres worth of strike. Most of our work to date has focused on the Serradella and Yarra Brook Hill project areas. That was a very large intrusion that we identified early on. It sticks out of the ground. It was a naturally logical sort of place to start our exploration. The intrusion itself is probably actually bigger than Chalice's Gonneville deposit. We've done a lot of drilling there, and let me go back. We did find quite a lot of high grade, albeit narrow, sort of PGE mineralisation. Our exploration there was telling us to sort of go further down dip or down plunge. And that was starting to get expensive. So I guess in the last sort of 12 months, we've tried to sort of refocus our exploration more towards near surface type opportunities, so shallow, potentially open pit kind of mining scenarios that are probably more within our wheelhouse given the current state of the markets. And so that's what Brassica presents to us. It's an interesting kind of geological setting that sort of looks similar to Gonneville, more or less the same stratigraphy, flipped over the other way, so kind of reversed in a sense. But it's got a lot of the hallmarks for what we would like to see in this sort of style of mineralisation. And so the moving loops, a ground geophysical survey that we did earlier in the year has identified some interesting conductors. So these sulphides, when you run an electric current over it, generate a magnetic response. And we have identified, we identified 3 conductors, as you see on the figure on the right, but only 2 of them are really of interest. 1 and 2 are the sort of the main players here. 3 is probably just a lithological response that doesn't necessarily represent mineralisation. Now, so I guess what gives us some encouragement here is that not only are we getting some conductance out of these 2 plates, but there has been some historical drilling conducted in this area going back to the 70s and 80s that showed some elevated nickel, copper, PGE, gold kind of anomalism near surface. So that's really encouraging. So that gives us the confidence that these conductors do represent mineralisation. So look, we're looking forward to drilling those during the upcoming summer season. And again, we've been fortunate enough to receive some WA government EIS funding to help share the cost of that exploration program. So again, it's reduces the risk for our shareholders. So thanks again to the WA government on that front. Meanwhile, there's a number of other targets within the Yarawindah Brook Project area. We're going to be focusing on the near surface type opportunities. There are still some near surface opportunities at Serradella, along strike from the higher grade mineralization before. This was actually the slide I was looking for. You know, as you can see, there's significant grades of PGEs, a little bit of copper and a little bit of nickel thrown in there as well. But down plunge is probably the real sweet spot, but we're going to have to save that for another day. For now, what we're looking at is extending the surface geochemistry programs. So believe it or not, most of this ground has never had any exploration for nickel and copper or PGEs before. And that's really because of the competing land use. As you can see, it's perfect broad acre cropping country, and that has been has inhibited previous explorers from getting out and doing their thing. And in fact, some of the previous explorers have actually been looking for bauxite, not nickel and copper. So we think there's a fantastic opportunity here to find new near surface deposits of nickel, copper, PGEs. Balance is one of them. We've conducted some surface geochemistry over what looks to be the right sort of rocks, and we're getting the right sort of geochemical signature. But there's other prospects in this project as well that we've only just sort of gaining land access to, and we'll conduct soil geochemistry programs during the summer season. In the meantime, we're kind of interested in what other commodities are potentially prospective here. Lithium's one of them. It's some of our neighbours are doing some lithium exploration. SQM have a joint SQM, one of the largest lithium companies in the world, have a joint venture with one of our neighbours. And we've been able to take our existing data sets and look at it through a different lens and say, well, is this also sort of prospective for lithium as well? And you know, why would you do that? Well, the reason is because one of the best lithium deposits in the world at Greenbushes is in the southwest, you know, and so it essentially the same sort of belt of rocks. It seems unlikely that Greenbushes would be the only deposit of its type in the southwest. I'm sure there's plenty of other similar sort of style deposits lurking in the southwest that just haven't been explored for. So we keep an open mind for that. And I guess to that end, we think there's many opportunities in the southwest for well, not just lithium, but gold, nickel and copper PGEs as well. And so we're applying some of our learnings from this part of the world into similar terrain, but beyond our current tenements, where we think that there just hasn't been the exploration for this sort of style of mineralisation. I think that represents a great opportunity for our company to be able to exploit the skills and knowledge that we've gained over the last few years and apply it to different settings. So they're opportunities that we're kind of keeping open mind about. All those sort of opportunities are really early stage at the moment. There's not too much we can talk about, but hopefully in the future we can work those other opportunities up and develop them into active exploration projects. So Ryan, that's pretty much the Caspin story as it currently stands. You know, well, I think we've got a lot going for us. It's Caspin represents a really interesting value proposition at the junior end of the market, speculative end of the market. I'll be interested if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate the presentation. Some of those projects look very, very exciting. Now, obviously, we'll open the floor up to Q&A now. I've got a couple to kick us off with. But ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please do submit them through the Q&A function. Now, obviously, Greg, let's just address the elephant in the room straight off the bat. Obviously, you know, the stock price has kind of suffered fairly drastically since IPO. Now, realistically, in the short to mid-term, what's the company's strategy to realistically enhance shareholder value?
Yeah, look, I think we've definitely come up against some headwinds on the nickel front and probably the PGE front as well. You know, it's well publicised, some of the struggles in Western Australian nickel and also on the PGE front, you know, in the last 12 to 24 months. But I think if I was a miner or a developer, that's a real concern for me. But that's not the value generator for an exploration company. We've got a market cap of about $5 million. Any discovery provides the opportunity to return multiples of that. And so that's what we focus on. And I don't believe that the nickel industry in Western Australia is dead. I think what's dead is mining deep underground, you know, at 1,500 meters or 2,000 meters, and processing that all through outdated technology. That's what's dead. But there's still opportunity for new discoveries that present a relatively cheap mining opportunity, and processing it through state-of-the-art processing plants, and that's the game, and I think that exists with PGEs as well. So we've got to apply our skills, which is, you know, we're an exploration company. We've got a really good background in Ni-Cu-PGE exploration, and we've got to apply that to make those next discoveries. That's the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you very much for the update clarification on that front. Now, when it comes to obviously funding exploration activities, you know, I did read briefly in the cash report that you've got a fairly decent amount of funding from the WA government, and then obviously in the presentation presented, I think there's around $1.5 million cash sitting on the books at the moment. But obviously, you know, given the current market conditions and where the share price is currently sitting, realistically, how does the company plan to fund further exploration activities across both projects?
I think our strategy is relatively low cost. So yeah, it's great that the WA government supports the exploration sector. I guess they recognise that you do have to have that pipeline of exploration comes through that to generate the mines that generate the wealth for the state. So that's important. The fact that we're getting those grants is somewhat of an endorsement on the quality of our projects and the quality of the team doing that work. So that's encouraging. But our programs are relative at this stage, relatively low cost, but can add a lot of value. And so, you know, and I sort of hinted at this here at Yarawindah. We think there's some excellent sort of deeper targets at Yarawindah, but it's not really the market to go drilling, you know, super deep holes. So focus on what we can achieve, which is near surface type targets. Yarawindah's hardly had any exploration near surface. The Mount Squires is generally underexplored. So they're the kind of opportunities that we're focused on at the moment, where we can add a lot of value with relatively small amounts of expenditure.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. Now, obviously, on the topic of the government grants, now, you know, obviously you've received, you know, endorsement from the government, which is great, and obviously, that, you know, any funding from them is always going to be positive. Moving forward, is there potential, you know, for further endorsement and further funding to receive from the state government?
I think so, Ryan. I think we actually tally it up. I think we've received about $500,000 worth of total funding over the course of the company's history. So, and that's probably across 3 or 4, maybe 5 different grants. So look, I think we've obviously done well in the past. You know, so I would hope that if we continue to generate the sort of targets and exploration programs that that grant program is designed for, then I would hope so.
Okay, thank you for that update. Now, just pivoting briefly to the location of the explorative sites. Now, with some of them being located on agricultural land and you requiring land access, does that present a potential you know, risk for the ability to actually explore on these sites? Or realistically, is you know, gaining access to that land to be able to test on a fairly easy and simplified process?
Well, you can look at risk as in terms of both threats and opportunities. And yeah, there's obviously threats attached to it, and that's partly the reason why a lot of explorers haven't done any work on this part of the world. it presents some, a different kind of scenario to what some explorers are used to or prepared to do. We've found that we've been able to generate really good relationships with our landowners. It does tend to limit the field season to some extent, although we do have the ability to explore all year round. So I think of it as more as of the opportunity. I think there's so many excellent exploration prospects out there that haven't been explored simply because people can't be bothered picking up the phone or going out and talking to people and working through getting some of those land access agreements. So I see it as an opportunity.
Oh, I'm really sure the market's going to really appreciate that update. Now, we've actually just got one more question here to wrap things up for the day. Now, obviously, between the two projects, the Yarawindah Brook as well as the Mount Squires, how is the company prioritising their exploration activities between the two, considering obviously what you've initially tested for and where you think the best value proposition lies?
Yeah, look, so there's a couple aspects to it. Firstly, there's a seasonality aspect. So our immediate focus is Mount Squires, more or less because of the access is easier this time of year. I think that, look, exploration companies are usually reasonably dynamic, and we can change our mind at the drop of a hat. And at the moment, I think most of the better opportunities are probably at our Mount Squires project. Simply because it's so underexplored, and that's despite what's going on with our neighbours as well. I would love to find a new nickel copper deposit, particularly with a big large lump of copper in it, and that's probably more likely at our Mount Squires project rather than our Yarawindah Brook project. But the opportunities there are excellent as well. So it's difficult to choose between the two because they're both sort of similar sort of opportunities, although a few little nuances here and there.
Of course. We'll appreciate the clarification on that one. Well, realistically, that wraps everything up for today. So, Greg, again, thank you very much for your time and expertise, and thank you to Caspin Resources for the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, this one has been recorded and will be chucked up on the Sharewise YouTube to watch as you see wish. So thank you very much again for your time, Greg. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Sharewise.